I've spent so much time with Dutch in the gang, I wanted to see what a life outside of this would be like, so I set myself a challenge. How long could I live as a frontiersman, surviving only off the land, before I got bored and headed back to camp? In order to do this, I would have to lay out some simple rules for myself to follow, the cans and cannots. This means no work with the other gang members, can't purchase provisions or tonics from stores, can't rob homes, but I am allowed to loot people when necessary. Must hunt to eat, can take on bounties, start off with only one set of clothes, set out with only a bow, sawn-off shotgun, carbine rifle and a knife, begin with no supplies at all, must use only a trapper for new clothing, and finally, I can purchase weaponry and ammunition, but only with money made from hunting. So with all that laid out, you're listening to Phil, and let's get to day 1. Before I headed out from Horseshoe Overlook, I wanted to double check everything was correct, so after having breakfast, courtesy of Pearson's stew, I gave all I had left to the camp donation box. I'd already given the very last of my funds earlier, so all that was left was this pen I'd received from Jimmy Brooks. Just so no one thought I was cheating, I want to quickly show you my inventory, which as you can see contains very little. I had earlier acquired the Legendary Animals map during a mission with Hosea. I did this intentionally as I knew I'd need those special pelts for clothing from the trapper. After removing all but the necessities of weaponry, then losing the clothing stored on my horse, I headed out on my way a little after 7 AM. Almost immediately spotting some deer nearby, I knew I had to prepare for lunch. One of my goals during this challenge was to try and capture only perfect pelts when possible, which I intended to trade in with the trapper for clothing. With both the 3-star belt and the carcass of the deer on the rear of my horse, I made my way to the man. Spotting some plant life along the way, I thought it best to pick as much as I could to add seasoning to my food. If I was going to live off the land, I was going to make it as comfortable as possible. Shooting down some birds whenever I saw the opportunity, I intended to use their flight feathers for such things as small game arrows for hunting. As I passed Guthrie Farm, I took note of the quality of a Devon ox, which if memory served me correctly, could be used to craft some clothing. This one was unfortunately only a 2-star pelt, no good to me. Finally arriving at the trapper, I sold off some unnecessary items to retain a little funding, keeping things such as the meat for food. Browsing through the garment sets, I made a note of such items and what I needed in particular to create them. At this point, with only $7.15 to my name, I wasn't purchasing anything. Having no warm clothing on my horse, I set my sights on the Cougar cutaway coat, which was part of the Night Wrangler clothing set. I really liked the look of it. The required ingredients was 1 perfect black bear and 2 perfect cougar pelts, none of which would be easy to find. The time now was around midday, so I set up camp for lunch, where the not-so-friendly Murphy brood made their presence known to me. Maybe this idea of living a life in the wilderness was a little more dangerous than I first realised. After enjoying a couple of pieces of seasoned venison, I was back on my travels. The rain was beginning to fall pretty heavily, so I knew I needed to get some warmer clothing pretty quickly. Coming across Guthrie Farm once more, I noticed that their Devon ox was now a top quality animal, so I made sure I grabbed it for the hide. Managing to do it pretty discreetly, I headed back to the trapper to sell, netting around $3.50. At this point, I had a little over $10, but I remembered something from earlier. When Arthur and Hosea went hunting, I stabled a Tennessee Walker, so I headed back to Valentine to see what price I could get for my current steed, intending to get back to the basic Walker. This brought me a nice $75. Saddling up the Tennessee Walker and renaming it Trigger II, I decided, whilst in town, to take on a bounty hunting mission, as this was allowed within the rules. The bounty brought in $50, totaling me to over $137 now, and I intended to use that money wisely. Knowing if I was going to track down and skin particular animals, I would need a more powerful rifle to maintain that perfect quality pelt, and the Springfield rifle for $120 was right in my price range. The time now was nearing 7 PM, so I headed to a more secluded spot overlooking the town, set up camp, and treated myself to more seasoned venison for dinner. Also, while I still had the meat from the other animals I'd been hunting, I cooked a few for later in case I needed to restore some cores on the road. To finish at camp, I made a couple of small game arrows with the flight feathers I'd acquired earlier. Not realising that when purchasing the Springfield rifle, I only had 4 rounds. I visited the gunsmith to stock up. It was getting late by this time and I wanted to start the morning early, so I remade camp, set up a tent and slept for the night, thus concluding my first day. After taking down a deer for breakfast whilst travelling west in hopes of fighting a black bear, I soon found myself near the Downs Ranch, whom had a few perfect quality animals I needed for supplies, such as the Devon ox and the big China pig. I realised that this may have been a little dishonest of Arthur, but he still is an outlaw, lest we forget. In Big Valley, West Elizabeth, I came across a gentleman who was crying out for assistance in defending against a wolf. Feeling I should be a good Samaritan and possibly balancing out my karma rating after the Downs Ranch slaughter, I decided to help the man. I dealt with the wolf and gave the poor soul a bottle of whiskey, but unfortunately he still passed. His horse, nearby, didn't make it either, and with this being a game of survival, I searched its saddlebags for supplies, where I was happy to find a potent health cure and some other goodies. I didn't want to waste the pelt of the wolf, so I skinned it. Even though it was only a poor quality pelt, I figured it would at least bring a few dollars in at the trapper, so I decided to bring it with me. Further along the trail, I came across a perfect elk, which gave plentiful in supplies. I knew I had limited space on the rear of Trigger II, so I had to make a choice. It was either the elk or the oxhide. I knew that I'd supplied the chopper with an oxhide previously, so the elk won this decision. With the time now being around midday, I decided to set up a fire for lunch, once again treating myself to some seasoned meat. A little past the Hanging Dog Ranch, I spotted a perfect American black bear in the distance, one of the animals I needed to create the cougar cutaway coat. Calling out to the bear as I drew closer, I put it down in one shot with the Springfield rifle. The next part became tricky. The black bear pelt would replace the elk pelt, and I didn't want to lose either, and knowing that the trapper had set up somewhere nearby, I hoofed it on foot, carrying my kill. Eventually finding the outdoorsman, I sold my kills along with some other unneeded belongings I'd came across. Now for the coat, I required 2 perfect cougar pelts. This wasn't going to be easy. Heading to a nearby spot favoured by cougars just north of Owengila, after killing a boar, a prompt informed me that I'd entered the territory of a legendary animal. This now took priority. After following the trail, I tracked and put down the legendary buck. The buck is one of the better legendary animals to take, as its antlers can be sold to fencers, allowing us to purchase the buck antler trinket, which greatly improves the chances of obtaining perfect quality pelts across all animals. The time was now around 5:30 PM, so I made camp for dinner. I spent the remainder of the day hunting for the cougar, all to no avail, but did manage to find another perfect American black bear, to which I sold to the trapper and set up camp for the night, putting an end to the second day. Cooking some big game meat for breakfast, I began my day as I'd finished the last, intending to find a cougar. When once again I couldn't seem to find any, I decided to travel all the way to the city of Saint Denis. Here I wanted to visit the fence and trade in for the buck antler trinket, which I did. The quality of all my pelts now had the chance to be improved. Whilst in the city, I noticed I was down to around $70, so I took a bounty poster from the local police station and tracked down the wanted outlaw Lindsay Wofford. After taking down both him and his men at the abandoned Fort Brennan and finding a rare Civil War knife, I returned his corpse to Saint Denis, earning myself a nice $100 for the bounty. Heading back to Owengila, determined to find this cougar, I set up camp around midday and ate. Noticing I had a few items that I could handcraft, I put idle hands to work after I ate, making supplies. After breaking down the camp, I came across a hunter nearby who was tracking a big game. Following him up the hill a little and watching him fail to kill a large grizzly bear, I put down the animal and was happy to learn it was of a perfect pelt. On my way back, I finally found the cougar. After setting up camp a few times and breaking it down, I was able to trigger a second cougar too. Heading to the trapper, it was finally time to get myself the coat I'd been wanting for so long, paying $39. The remainder of my day was pretty much the same, hunting perfect quality animals wherever I could find them. There were a few clothing items from the trapper that I had my eye on, one of which I needed a perfect beaver pelt, but in order to obtain one, I would have to purchase a varmint rifle from the store, so off to Valentine I went. It was around $72, and with my current funds being a little over $100, it was manageable. Unable to find any beavers at Owangila late at night, I decided to take on a little fishing for tomorrow's breakfast before settling in for the night. I found a few others while looking out for the beaver, such as the muskrat and musky fish. After tracking down a couple of beavers and accidentally lowering the quality of their pelts by shooting them more than once due to the deadeye system, I finally bagged a perfect one. Meeting the space that the musky fish took on the back of my horse for the beaver hide, I replaced it, set up a small camp and cooked the fish so it didn't go to waste. Heading back to the trapper, I now had the ingredients to craft the country vest, which was part of the Mountain Man garment set and was $25. Studying the requirements for different clothing options from the trapper, I made a list of what I needed to obtain to get the clothing I wanted for Arthur Morgan. Over the course of the next however many days, I tracked animals wherever I could, always trying to obtain the perfect pelts, not only for clothing but for consumables too. By the time I'd found all I needed to, Arthur's hair and beard were becoming increasingly longer, really giving him the outdoorsman feel and look. I still took on bounties to obtain funds and sold animal pelts to the trapper and butchers wherever I could, plus a little bit of fishing now and again. I upgraded my horse to a Golden Dun Mustang, whom I nicely named Trigger the Third. I don't know how many days I'd spent out in the wild, and although I'd enjoyed a lot of it, it was time to go home, for now at least. I felt like I'd accomplished what I needed to, and I'd managed to abide by the rules I'd set for myself, but I was beginning to miss the gang and the story of the game itself. It was good to be home. This video was a little bit different from what I normally produce for you guys, but I hope you enjoyed it regardless. If you did, you all know what to do, and if you're new here and aren't subscribed to the channel already, please consider doing so. If you wish to get in touch, you can do so by finding any and all social medias you may need in the video description below. Thank you all for watching. You've been listening to Phil of Philby Gaming, and I'll see you in the next one.